Hello and welcome to Screenworks. I'm John Uriarte, curator of Screenworks with the Photographers Gallery in London. Together with Marco De Mutis, digital curator at Fotomuseum Winterthur, we created this collaborative series of live stream events. Screenworks is a fortnightly program looking at the changing role of the photographic image on its networked and digital form. We invite artists, researchers, and curators to share their screen and take the audience to the places where their core practice takes place. The format of each walk is different. It might be a peek behind the scenes, a guided tour into a particular corner of the internet, or a participatory presentation, among others. We started the Screenworks in 2020, and we have hosted more than 80 events so far. You can find the recording of each of them on our website, and you can also find all the recordings of each event on our YouTube channel. Please remember that if you have found Screenworks useful for your professional or personal interests, you can subscribe to folders. For €7, you will support the program and its artists, and also get your personalized folder on folders.screenworks.com. There you will receive files and extra content from the artists and researchers of Screenworks. And finally, some housekeeping information. Your microphone should be muted to avoid noise disturbances. If it is still on, please mute it now. And we are recording and we will be archiving this event. So you can turn off your camera if you don't want to show your face in the recording. And please use the public chat to ask any questions, or feel free to send them through a private message to Marco or to me. And we will bring them all to the discussion with today's artist at the end of the event or throughout the event itself.
And hello and welcome from me as well. I'm Marco De Mutis from Fotomuseum Winterthur. Today I'm honored to give up my title of digital curator to someone who has taken the possibility of curating in digital spaces to a whole different level. Forget Zoom live streams as a dedicated space for exploration of networked images. Forget websites claiming to host digital exhibitions, and get ready to enter the playable art spaces of the Museum. The Museum is a series of virtual gallery spaces for art that have been created and curated by Michael Berto since 2017. Developed through the popular game engine Unity, they are not only special 3D worlds for artistic contemplation, but provide a unique space for artworks that would otherwise not be hosted in traditional physical museum rooms and gallery white boxes. Berto has developed his pioneering and visionary series through international collaborations and experimented with increasingly ambitious zooming projects, from designing gardens to large-scale museums, and from gallery spaces to a digital rendition of the alpine scenes of Switzerland, so with the Z. On one hand, the museum offers an inspiring view in the ways in which art could conquer all of these landscapes. But on the other hand, it shows how software and game engines can be turned into different spaces, and how artists and curators can engage with the specificity of this world. In the screen walk, Berto will take us on a tour of what he calls the impossibility space for art that is unique to software and video games, sharing artworks that can live exclusively in digital worlds from the various Zoom releases. Michael Berto is an artist, writer, composer, and designer working in the video game industry, and the founder, curator, and creative director of the Museum, a virtual art gallery. Dear Michael, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. What a kind introduction. So lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Marco and John. So hello, yes, my name is Michael Berto. I am an artist, a composer, designer, and most relevant to this talk, I'm the curator of the Museum. Just a bit of a preamble here. We're going to look at every Museum release we've done so far with specific artworks. Yeah, just a little preamble while I share my screen and we get some context for the talk. One moment. Okay, so here's my screen. So when I was asked to do this talk, I met briefly with Marco, and we were discussing what I might want to talk about. What seemed very interesting, and what Marco said would be suitable for screen walks, was a kind of sort of retrospective / exploration of this impossibility space concept. And that phrase came up when we were talking, I think, and that phrase is really something I use when I'm approaching artists and I talk about sort of, I'm sort of encouraging ideas of what they might want to do. I talk about this impossibility space, and it's basically, when I approach artists and I say I'm from a virtual gallery and I'd like you to do some work for us, I want to try and as much as possible not try and pigeonhole the artist into thinking, okay, I have to make an artwork that fits in an art gallery. I want to remind them that the art gallery is made in a game engine, and this makes many things possible, makes many impossible things possible in terms of the ideas they want to express. So that's what the impossibility space is, and so to embrace building something in a game engine and what you can do there that you can't do, not just in real life, but maybe in other mediums too. So I have a quote here from David Lynch, and he once said that cinema can say things that are difficult to put into words, and that cinema is a language that can say abstract things. And this is really how I feel, not just about cinema, I totally agree with him, but I also feel this way about software, as well as many other mediums. But software is this medium, like cinema, that can express ideas, abstract ideas, and very complicated ideas deceptively simply, I think. And I'm a big believer in the power of a game engine as a tool for making art and making experiences that can convey the ineffable. So this isn't really a dissertation or a big theoretical exploration of the impossibility space, but really we'll go through some of the releases of the Museum, and hopefully the artwork speaks for itself. As you can see here, I wanted to start in the engine with something like this on purpose because of where we'll go next, which is at the first release of the Museum. And for those of you who aren't familiar so much with game engines, this is what one looks like. This is Unity. And it's really this sort of strange perspective that you get when you're making a video game that when I was learning to make games, I found actually really quite inspiring. And so that might make a lot of sense as I zoom around in these behind the scenes zones. If we switch to our first release, which was the Museum, this is how it begins. We begin in this space outside the world. And I haven't, it's been quite a while since I've actually played this release. Preparing for the talk, I jumped back in again, and it was really, really a wonderful thing to be reminded of, like, this is how it started. And it really is not just how this release started, but how the whole concept started. This sort of love for the process of making games and just how artful that process can be, that I found very inspiring, and wanted to quite literally make a gallery that embraced that sort of thing, this process, and not to get lost in the art, to embrace the art that gets lost in the process, basically. So we'll go into the Museum, and we'll start by talking about this piece. Now, this is a piece called Fountain by Matthew Keff. And so I think this is very self-explanatory and sort of really encapsulates in a nice, simple way what the impossibility space is, and also the embrace of process. Now, this is a particle system, technically speaking, and a particle system is very rudimentary and used a lot in games for all sorts of things. And I like to think of this work as kind of like someone made a car out of the windshield wipers. This is an artwork, fully complete artwork that utilizes pretty exclusively the particle system and does something really transformative. That, again, not a dissertation, but there are elements of the impossibility space that sort of deal with quite literally like impossible physics and perpetual time, and these kind of metaphysical, physical concepts are really interesting when you put them into software and the artist now has command of them. And they do very interesting things, artists. So again, we'll move on pretty quickly, I think. I say that, but maybe we'll be here for 45 minutes, we'll see. But again, this love of the process. Over here is this little exhibit called the modular assortment, the modular assortment. And these are literally the pieces that make up the building by an artist called Quinn Spence. And so this was, again, me wanting to open the gallery, really showing the process, showing that there's no part of the museum that isn't artful, that isn't someone's art. And by extension, there really isn't a part of a video game that isn't art, in my opinion. You know, even the administrative tasks that take to make a video game require high artfulness. But even these little pieces, you know, I chose Quinn specifically because they have this ability to, well, I saw work at the time that really evoked this concept of like transcendent mundanity. And this is something that I personally love to build galleries in this way, because I think real galleries in real life have this quality of transcendent mundanity. It's like the most, definitely don't want to use the word boring, but very, very sort of, you know, the floors and polished floors and walls, white walls, and very, you know, not all galleries, but most galleries, the standard gallery we think of in our head is transcendently mundane, so beautiful, and it gets out of the way of the artwork. Best galleries, I think so, and that's really what I tried to do with this gallery. You know, the space gets out of the way. At least these first three. We'll talk about the evolution of that a little later, but to get out of the way, sort of like ambient music. You know, Brian Eno talks about ambient music being easy to ignore but compelling to listen to, and that's sort of the vibe that I'm going for with the spaces. Easy to ignore, seems just like a normal space, but this is someone's artwork, and we like to celebrate that. In a similar way, less overtly, but I made this gallery, when I really didn't know how to make games that well. It was almost a practice run. And the reason why it's so feature complete really is because I use an asset called the First Person Explorer, which is by a great friend of mine and a longtime collaborator called Richard Walsh. And it allowed me to basically have a first person controller and the ability to, you know, pick up items and do all this sort of stuff. And when I talk about the impossibility space, this is a little bit of a hidden example of it, but with the First Person Explorer, as you can see here, it says, by decree of the artist, the model is interactable and has no audio attached. Oops, well, that's fun. Where are we? And so this is, you can turn on and off physics as you desire with this tool and just in game engines in general. And so, excuse me, just having a drink of coffee. This is the sort of control I like to offer artists, because, you know, the digital space allows for great freedom, especially for a visitor. But I have like a really deep reverence for the reverence of art galleries. So if the artist wants their work to, I mean, this is a very rudimentary example, but if the artist doesn't want their work interactable for whatever reason, whether it's part of the work to not be interactable or just a personal preference, it's the sort of thing that we can embrace or step back from for an artist. And it's really, for me, it's really about empowering artists as much as possible. Another thing I say to artists, basically, there are very few rules and restrictions for a Zeum, but you know, if it can work in a game engine, it can go in the Zeum. And I think that's a very empowering blank canvas to give an artist, at least I hope so. So I do want to show you another example of the great things that one of the benefits of creating a virtual gallery can do. And if you'll bear with me, I'll just walk up these stairs. We implemented teleportation in later versions, which is very handy. But this is very immersive. So a great benefit of working in a game engine and working with artists who understand the game engine is I can also say, you know, you can work in your own scene and you can have complete control, which effectively means that we're taking the viewer into a dimension, a world that is totally created by the artist. Has nothing to do with how we set up this space. You know, they can use their own controllers and do their own sound. And this is a nice example, a nice simple example. by great artists, and again, longtime collaborator, Moshe Linka. This beautiful piece. There's no volume, so there's no sound. If you're wondering if you can hear anything, there is sound. So I encourage you to check this out yourself and enjoy them. Enjoy all the releases as they're intended. But see, this is a nice example of we're suddenly in a totally different, art style, vibe. We have different camera effects going on here with the lens. And this is also what I love. I mean, I very much accept all types of artwork, from traditional mediums, photography, painting, illustration, to things like this fully immersive 3D scenes with, the whole kit and caboodle. I have no favorite. I love all types of expression, but obviously we make a digital gallery. So when an artist or a developer can embrace the space in this way, it is very exciting for me personally. And I like to think when I approach a developer, I have a little outlet for them to try out their ideas that maybe don't fit in the game they're working on, or a little idea they don't really know what to do with, but know the language. They know the language of the technology, and they can do really beautiful stuff. So I love when they do that, and we'll see a lot of that today, I think. So let's move on a little bit. Let me go to the next release, which was the ZM Garden. Enter. So when I was looking retrospectively back at these, the ZM Garden has a lot of great examples of not just from the artists playing in this impossibility space, but also from the development side, sort of practicing what I preach a little bit. And thinking about the ZM, I say to the artist, this is a virtual gallery. You can do anything you want. And then I started to think, well, you should embrace that a little bit. How can you not elevate the gallery experience, but elevate the experience of a digital space with digital art? And so I fell in love with the work of a little collective called Jugoya Studios, who designed the garden space, which, as you can see, is very painterly. And they sort of specialize in immersive paintings. So, for example, they did, I think, Monet's Water Lilies is one example. Dali paintings that you can walk around in, fully immersive. And I loved that. I think it's such a beautiful idea. So I asked them to make me a similar sort of painterly garden that we could literally walk around in a painting for the space. And I think it worked really beautifully. But let's have a look at some artworks. So again, shaders like particle systems are very rudimentary building blocks of video games, and stuff that, it's when you cast a spell, the spells look pretty because of shaders usually. And I romanticize that. I put a shader in a gallery any day. I think they're fantastic. And when you have an artist who makes something like this, it's very inspiring, because it's again knowing the language and expressing an idea that just lives really well in the artistic context. And just like this one here, which I think is very special. This I like to call an impossibility space painting. This is reacting to audio, not my audio, but there's a recorded conversation with the artist's mother here. This is by Leon Denise. And he's a kind of a shader, very prolific shader artist, and very talented. And this I think is very beautiful, because it speaks to time and memory. And this is a memory he has, he's recorded, of his mother, with a beautiful 3D scan and this beautiful effect. And it changes to his dad, I believe, in 10 minutes after the conversation is over. So this is another great example of like someone using that impossibility space. And something I like to think of that really tickles me is when I get something like this, I think, well, how would you make this in a real gallery? And it's a very fun thought experiment. I think even attempting to would create very interesting artwork in the physical space. And there's two more works I want to show you in the garden while we're here. This one I just think is fantastic, and maybe you can see why it's a bit self-explanatory. The effect is really interesting. So this is called Snap Mesh by an artist called Ryan Trawick. Now, I love this piece because it really represents to me, again, I'm not speaking for the artist this whole time. This is all, I like the work to speak for itself. So anything I say is really my interpretation. But for me, this really is sort of like a timeline of video games almost that you can walk through. And I love that element of it. So as you get closer to this piece, the resolution of the face gets much more higher resolution and reveals itself to be a face. And as you walk away, it derealizes. And so, I mean, again, it's very impressive as a standalone piece and sort of isolated. But again, this is almost a tech demo in a way. And I love that. I think it's so inspiring and interesting, especially when movement and this is reacting to every little muscle twitch that I make. And I think in terms of viewer participation in the work changing as they explore it is also a very compelling aspect to the interactive space. And so this last one I won't show, but we'll go over that. It's Beautiful Fish by Paul, another great. Imagining this in real life and how you would construct it, it would be fantastic. But I'm glad we have it here in the digital form. So this piece over here, I'm not going to show it because it's there's lots of warnings here, as you can see, because it has strobing imagery, so I don't want to do anything to affect anyone's photosensitivity here. But this is a piece that affects the perception, so the visual experience of what happens. Basically, I don't even really want to, I think it begins really quickly with, it goes really quickly into flashing images, but the longer you are in this zone and are staring at this painting, the screen will start changing and the sound will get very overwhelming, and the longer you're there, the more intense this effect will be, until effectively it renders you unable to really see or see where you're going, or you're at the will of the experience. And it's something, again, I keep saying this, but imagining how you would convey this idea or this experience in any other medium. For example, in cinema, you can have like a dream sequence or a trippy sequence, but cinema is a passive experience. So suddenly, even though that can be very transformative and very impactful in cinema, when your avatar into an experience is totally consumed by this effect, it becomes very affecting. And I really like that sort of thing. And it's really kind of there's a foolproof here, because if you just walk out of the circle, the effect goes away. So effectively not looking at the painting makes it stop, or just walking away. So it's just a very interesting idea. The piece is called Gateway to Pluto, I believe. Where is the didact here? By Tito Millet, another longtime collaborator. And again, just a very well-executed piece that really speaks the language of game making and art making in the digital space. So let's move on quickly, because I'd love to take your questions if you have any, and I know the hosts have questions too, and I'd love to answer them. But here we are. So this is our third release, the ZM Gallery. Now, in the last one, I spoke about sort of embracing the impossibility space ourselves. So making a gallery that's a garden, that's also an immersive painting, something to embrace this like interactive digital art thing. The ZM Gallery, the third release, I kind of went the other way again. I thought, well, no, I actually love art galleries. I love the transcendent mundanity of an art gallery. And so I really wanted to go back and embrace that this time. And that's what we did. So this one's a little bit, it's much more similar to the first one, with color void exteriors and the same assets. That's just a little inside baseball. There's no real point to that, but that's sort of why the switch happens. And then interestingly, we go back the other way in our fourth release, sort of back towards like embracing the impossibility space, embracing what it is to be a digital gallery. But what I wanted to show here is this little gift shop. And if you've played this release, you might not be familiar with it because it doesn't unlock until you see this piece. And I'm not sure if everyone sees every piece in the gallery, but once you go see that, it unlocks, and it's sort of meant to be a reward for seeing most of the artworks. Because contextually, you sort of want to know that this was an artwork in the gallery. This is an artwork, but you can sort of come to the gift shop and pick it up. And what I like about this idea, not necessarily why we did it, but in hindsight, is that it really shows you what an artwork is in the digital space when you think about like a gift shop. So this model is the model that is in the gallery, not reduced in polygons or anything, same textures. So the idea that you can have a very immersive and big scene like this one is in the gallery. It's a room sort of dedicated to art assets like this bull and by Most Ancient. So you can come here and sort of see every aspect of it. You can see the craftsmanship. And while the artists chose, well, it was, I mean, it was a collaboration, but you know, the artists decided to have their room, have this bull, for example, quite big in the room, not interactable, but the option to then come downstairs and have a look at it and in every way that you like is really valuable, I hope, and fun for me. And really the reason, one of the big reasons why I make this gallery, because I think 3D art is sculpture. It's, I mean, maybe sounds silly to say, of course it is, but in terms of reverence, I hold it, you know, like a block of marble that becomes a human figure. I think it's a beautiful thing. And so I like this idea of being able to put something in the game engine and just look at every facet of it and enjoy it however you like. Again, if the artist doesn't want you doing that, we won't do that. But I like that example. I mean, again, we have the pieces of the world here for the same reasons in the first one, just to remind, well, not to remind, but to embrace that no part of the process in the museum is not someone's art. And I like that. I like showing that off. Okay, so let's go. These are all quite a few years ago now, so hopefully I'm remembering all the best things about them. But this is our most recent release, the ZM exposition, and as you can see, very different looking. Great segue there, talking about Quinn's pieces and making up the gallery and seeing every piece. Again, with the garden, we were going into the impossibility space ourselves. As I say ourselves, really, myself and my little team. And I, you know, I love the act of curation. I love working with artists. It's a very selfish endeavor, this ZM thing. I very indiscreetly pick artists that I personally want to work with. In the same way, I like to embrace the what can we do to enhance the experience of not just a gallery but a digital gallery. And so with Quinn's pieces, the idea there was transcendent mundanity. And as I said, no part of the process is not art. So I always thought of Quinn's pieces and the gallery that we end up building as Quinn's contribution, you know, artwork contribution to the museum. And in the same way, I thought, well, I'd love to give that canvas to another artist who is more sort of architecturally inclined. Quinn makes the parts modular, and I build the gallery. But I thought, well, how about I let someone else build the gallery, and we adapt to that now. Leonard Lemaitre made the art for this. He's again another longtime collaborator and friend. And I had we have the luck of having quite a good rapport because we've worked together for many years. And I'd seen him work and build 3D spaces, and very mind-blowing to watch the guy work. And so I thought, yeah, I wonder if he'd want to build the gallery. And he did, and that was great. And the good thing about having that rapport, again, very lucky, in that he doesn't work modularly. So this is all handcrafted in sort of one piece and built, sort of painted over time. But because we have that rapport, he was very collaborative, and we were able to adjust to the artworks as they were coming in, and we would work together and build the space around them, which is how I do it, how I usually do it. The space is dictated by the artworks, and we build around it. And the same sort of thing happened here, but I was able to say, okay, once we've done that part, once we've built around the artworks, then by all means, make the space your own and make it in your vision. And that's what he did, and it's wonderful. So just to conclude a little bit, this is the journey. I mean, we can pop around and look at other things too, but why I wanted to start in the engine and show you how we began is because this idea of software having its own language and what that means is like, I like to compare, well, you know, we talk about runtime. You know, when software is running, that's when it's all happening. And it's like, I compare it to the projector being turned on a movie set. Like if we look here, now this is running, the projector's running, you know, if the film's going through the camera and we're projecting the image on the screen, and everything, all the code is talking to all the art assets. But if we end runtime, we let Unity do its thing, as you might expect, the fish disappears. There is no fish. There is no artwork without runtime. And I like to think of this, and again, maybe a bit of a romantic idea, but that it's sort of the same thing as without us, there is no artwork. Without the viewer, there is no art. Without consciousness, there is no art. And so I like this romantic idea that software is like the imagination kicking in of the computer, and it brings together all these little impulses and ideas, and at the whim of the artist makes the artwork. And so I like that comparison with cinema. It's a nice idea, I think. So I do have a little sort of concluding statement, and then I'd love to take questions and talk to the host if they're so inclined. So let me just read this little short paragraph. So it's easy to say that video games represent the nexus of all creative mediums working together, as the proof is in the pudding. Look at any video game and consider all disciplines that are responsible for its existence. Even in the administrative elements, as I said before, of making a game, there is artfulness, and there must be. There is a language and a unique form of expression and potential for experience that exists uniquely at this nexus. Software can be the method of creation as well as the substrate that keeps the creation alive. And art does not exist in a vacuum, and art does not exist without you. These are two very important elements, the artist and the audience. One cannot exist without the other. So all your biological systems come together to hold a thought, and in the same way, all the systems of a computer come together via software to produce this art, this thing called digital art. It's a very wide, broad, and deep canvas that I love to explore, and I love to enable artists to explore. And I think galleries do this very well, digital galleries do it very well in creating a space for this to happen. And I'm very, very lucky that I get to facilitate that, a very great pleasure. And so I do hope you'll check out all these releases after the talk, and seek out digital and real life galleries and do yourself a favor. You know, have a great time. So that's really what I had prepared. By all means, if you have any questions, please ask them, and I'll throw it over back to the host. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, as we already anticipated to you, John and I have so many questions, but of course we also invite the audience to jump in, leave their questions in the chat, or here in Zoom or in Twitch, and we'll bring them to Michael. I know that John, you have a question already, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I have a few of them, but one of them that I think that we have already talked about, Marco, is this idea of being able, like the interactivity of the artworks, how it changes, and what like their digital and playable form allows, no, to as an interactivity with the artwork itself, and how like there's a big difference, I think, from the experience of interacting with an artwork physically or on site, no, against online or on a game. So yeah, that's something that I was also curious to know what's the reaction of the artists, if they are like happy to see their artworks being, I don't know, like the person who's experiencing the exhibition being able to grab them, throw them. Even I think some of them the scale can be changed. So I was just curious to know, like, what's the experience of your conversation with the artist about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I am very overly accommodating of this notion of. Well, at least I'm very aware of this freedom that the digital space gives a visitor, and what that can potentially do to the reverence of a piece. So I always like to emphasize, like, if it's important that people don't mess with this work, if you don't want, because as you say, some works can be picked up and carried around. Like, if you don't want someone else's piece to appear in your zone, like, we can work around that. We'll try and do some creative coding and turn off pieces as you enter the room, so it's just the piece. I've had no complaints really. Again, I'm the one that's always like, are you sure you want people walking too close to your piece? Yeah, are you sure? And everyone's usually really cool about, that's the great thing for the I mean, not even for the most part, in totality, every artist I've ever approached just gets it. And so
Yeah, nice.
there's very little abrasiveness thing.
No, that's really great to hear. I guess that the freedom, no, that allows like the lack of materiality in the artwork, in terms of interactivity, that's something that we should like consider, and I guess that artists should consider when working as well. What I'm trying to say is, like, if you are working in a new artwork, which is meant to be shown in a playable space, think about its playability. Think on how that artwork can be playable, and maybe go beyond the sort of traditional notion of just looking at art as an object, So I guess that there should be certain attention in like thinking and looking at art as a playable object instead on these kind of scenarios, and that's a great development, I would say, for the arts.
Not only
Yeah,
that,
I agree.
I think that after I had that experience of playing with the object, I think in the first Zoo museum that I tried, I started going to exhibition in physical spaces, thinking, I wonder how would that painting or that statue feel if it kind of bounces on the floor,
Yeah, I mean, these are all very interesting elements. And again, I love video games and I love art galleries almost equally. And I love I do actually appreciate, I think it's quite important, the untouchability of the artwork in a real life gallery, because it gives you the space between the artist and I guess the artist and the viewer to have this chemical reaction. There's a reverence and there's a space and a place for you to be, and the artist, especially with a painting or a photograph, the artist sort of knows where you're going to be and they want to show you something very specific, and it's great. And I'm very aware of that's why we don't turn on, like, you can pick up everything by default, because even if the artist doesn't really mind, they're like, oh no, I don't mind if my sculpture is picked up. That's great. It's a video game. I think I mind. I think if you don't want that, if that's not part of your thing, if it's not really part of what you're trying to say, then I don't want the artwork that is the museum to affect the artwork that is the artist's work. So I'm actually the one that's a little bit strict about that sort of thing, which might seem contradictory, because I'm all about interactive digital spaces, but I also embrace the very traditional display and curation of art. So I get very excited when someone does something interactive and it's basically like a little game level, because this is the antithesis of games. Every part of a game is art, and the game itself is art. A bit of a tangent, but I was thinking, I really think that the term video game is such a juvenile term to talk about what the medium is. And maybe that's because I grew up with the word, and when you're a kid, video game, it's fun. But then I thought, movies is a really weird word too. It's very juvenile, but we call them movies in great seriousness. And they called movies like talkies because people talked in them and then they moved and they talked. And so it's even that's quite juvenile. And I like to remind myself of that, like, to not overthink. It's a video game, try and find a different word for it. Like in this case, I've chosen software, not because of that, but broadly, I don't think it's just video games that can make digital art. But yeah, just a tangent that movies is a silly word, but it's held in great reverence now. And I think hopefully that's what happens to video games, even though it seems at face value quite a very silly term for quite serious and sometimes work that gets done in that space.
But that's also very interesting. I think the two things that you said. One, maybe also this idea of, or the expectation that somebody has when they download and enter one of these 3D spaces. I guess, like, we are familiar with commercial video games. So I can totally relate and understand like your fear of people just going in as if it's another first-person shooter rather than, you know, like a space for contemplation of artworks. Or yeah, there is interaction if the artist allows it, but it's still a different way in which you want the user to work with to play with the environment, right? So I think, yeah, working within this tradition of video games and working within a game engine that pushes you towards a certain form, I guess that is interesting and difficult. And there's like resistance or way that you have to carve out the special place that you're trying to build. And then, yeah, the second thing that I was thinking about, since you talk about cinema, it reminded me of, you know, like Lev Manovich at the turn of the century in the language of new media, where he was saying that, you know, cinema is linear and the new language of software is the database. I wonder if you have thought about a similar comparison, but more specific to game engines, because, you know, what is this like a new language, not just of software, but specifically of game engine. I think that John was maybe proposing interactivity as one of the features. But I don't know if you had something that you thought about in this context.
Yeah, maybe a little, maybe I can answer your question. Yeah, I think, again, sort of how I approach the talk too, and thinking about the impossibility space and the language of software, that's sort of where it begins and ends with me, that evocative statement, very much in a Lynchian way, that when he talks about the language of cinema, you know, you could say he's talking about like camera angles and lighting and scene setup, but that's not what I think he's really talking about, or what I'm trying to, resolve in the software space. It's more that, again, the proof is in the pudding. The language is emergent, and it's not really, it can be technical talk, but it's really about how the ideas are expressed. You could say how simply they're expressed, not how simply they're made, but how complex and abstract an idea can be, and how it can be just fully realized in this space. Interaction, yeah, interaction, you know, it's optional. I think it's not intrinsic for digital art to be, and that's not what you're saying, or not what anyone's saying really, but yeah, I think, again, like the piece I showed earlier of the resolving face, it's like this is a great way to express that idea, and a way that you could say that artist knows how to speak the language of the medium that they're working in. I think the best artworks, or the best work, any work, no matter what you're doing, happens when the person making it really understands the medium that they're making it for. And when it comes to the digital medium, it's very, very, very broad, and there's lots of possibilities. So again, the language is just, we're all learning how to speak it, and people are very good at speaking it, and they do amazing things with it. And yeah, I just think you know, I'm constantly surprised still, you know, by games, by especially artists making smaller things, things that, you know, I like the things that I make because they're not really games, and I mean, I can only call them software, and they're games by default because they're made in Unity. I'm not really talking about the ZM, I mean my personal work, you know. And it's just the method of exploring ideas that just, I feel, can't be expressed any other way. Or, you know, you do something as an artist, and then if you can speak another language, an artistic language, the thing you did initially just begs to be more. And I have an example here, if I might toot my own horn, of what I mean by that. This is, again, the ZM gallery, and so I have these little drawings that I do, or that I did, these little iconography drawings. This piece is called iconography, and I just drew obsessively, you know, hundreds and hundreds of these little icons, and I wasn't really sure why I was doing it. I just liked how they looked. And then I saw them on the page, you know, I organized them, and I was organizing them in different organizations and making all different patterns with them. And I thought, well, I'd love to algorithmically do this and see what you can do about that. And so collaborated with Richard again on the code for this, but this was just a still image. And then I wanted to have some motion and variety. And in a way, we're exploring all the icons. And so this became more than an image. This became somewhat of a moving image, obviously. But it's almost like a language is being spoken. And I like that it looks like some sort of code, and the code is like, you know, a cryptic code, you know. And so by extension, you go further and you think, well, what else can I do with it now that I have that? And then you make a room with all the pieces on it. And suddenly you're immersed in this. This is what my mind looked like when I was making it, you know. But this is what I think about taking an idea that can then be enhanced, become so much more than just the flat piece on the page. Again, it's like what cinema is to video games. It's and what all the mediums they come together in the video game medium. This is sort of an example of that.
Yeah, I was thinking the other, like as you are speaking about languages, I guess one of the big languages also when thinking on this kind of exhibitions, it's the architecture or the space building, on how to like how to decide or where to start, because I mean you said that you start with, if I understood it correctly, that you start with the space, offer it to the artist, and also to adapt it. But I guess that there's also every Zoom, it's quite, I wouldn't say specific, but it does have certain references, no? Like the gallery, the garden, even the last one, it's like this sort of Swiss landscape, and photorealistic, very sort of romantic landscape, Swiss view. I was just thinking like, how did you decide or where all this starts from? Is there like a starting point to decide, okay, this is going to be a garden, this is going to be a gallery, this is going to be the Swiss landscape?
Yeah, there's no uniform you know, reasoning, but like I explained to someone, you know, I did a little talk at an event in Tokyo, again, where I talked about forgetting about doing the museum, because it's part of the process. It's like and it's sort of part of the answer too, is they said, you know, you can, have you ever considered like automating the process, like making the gallery and then using asset packages to like populate the gallery, and then you don't have to build a gallery every time. You just have a gallery, and then you just filter in the artworks, and then you sort of save yourself time. You can maybe do more galleries, and maybe the implication. And I said to him, again, very selfish process, very non-curatorial, very game development, is that I like to start everyone like it's a lump of clay. Like I don't take anything for granted from before, except for, you know, things like the assets that we use. In this one, we had Leonard and Sirius working together. Sirius did the programming before I used Richard's assets. Yeah, so again, it really begins with the artwork, and we build around it. And really from scratch, and working modularly is really easy to do that. Like I said, I was lucky to work with Leonard, who doesn't work modularly, but we were still able to do that. We build around the artworks. However, I do give the artists an idea, like if we sort of do like a mock gallery, and I say, you know, this totally can change, but just so you have an idea of what the space might look like, sort of the lighting, just the vibe, to give them like an idea of what they might want to do. We make something like a little bit of something like that, like a little sort of maquette of the space, and then that's sort of just to get the creative juices flowing. And then when the artworks start coming in, yeah, we build around it. In terms of the gallery and the garden and the Swiss Alps. So again, talking about pushing into the impossibility space myself, I always try and do something interesting for me on the development side. Even if I don't do anything and it's just a straight gallery, it's very interesting and very fulfilling. But I do like to try and either learn something or try a little experimental idea. So the garden was the first effort in that, to try. The garden is a garden because basically I just asked that artist to make me an immersive painting. I can't remember if I said it should be a garden. I might have said so, because I just love gardens, love the idea of a garden. And so it's either they chose to make a garden because it was in their wheelhouse, or we said that just because it was a nice idea. Not even trying to make it like, is a garden compatible with art galleries? No, it was just really like, what's a space that is evocative? And then we go back to standard galleries, because I'm like, well, I missed that vibe. But the most recent release, that as we can see here, is sort of a best of both worlds. So I was able to experiment more, very specifically in a narrative way, because that's sort of, I'm a writer first and foremost, it's how I identify. And so I ended up with this project that I felt I'm always thinking of like the story of the museum and the fact that there is no exterior, well, there wasn't in the previous ones. Like, where is this gallery? Again, this thing I call the forced context of a first-person video game that is inescapable and that I really love. And it's like it's automatically having like 90% of the experience there by having someone first person in a space. It's a forced context, even in a abstract space like the Z. I mean, even the most recent one's pretty abstract. It's in the Swiss Alps, but it's not really. But yeah, sorry, I lost the thread.
No,
By the way,
don't wo-
I wanted to add, because I think it's an interesting time, at least for me, to talk about this, because Photo Museum Winterthur is being renovated. So I was just the other day inside a very unromantic Swiss landscape of like cables and wires and people with helmets and, you know, thinking about building
Fantastic.
a space, you know, an exhibition
Yeah.
from scratch, which and I think now actually it's an interesting moment in terms of photography museum. Now we have like a in Munich, right? There is this museum closed for like 5 years, and Pompidou in France as well is being renovated. Like there's these processes in physical spaces are crazy. They require like incredible time, fundraising, lots of people, you know. So I think there is something very beautiful and also very romantic of like this idea of curating that comes with like building the space around the artworks and the artists together.
Great
But
affordance of a digital space. Yeah.
and I also really enjoy like your perspective that is very fluid between, you know, like art galleries, physical spaces, and digital spaces, which I think it's also something that we share in the sense that, you know, there's sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's something from the past, but I think sometimes still is alive this division between analog, digital, physical, virtual, or something that comes up from time to time. And I think it's very inspiring to think of things that extend the space and this idea of impossibility in space. One thing that I wanted to ask you about is, um, you know, we talked about like this idea of a multiplayer space or these ideas of or even like screen walks as a way that privileges more maybe communication or a social component as well. You decided specifically to do all of these as downloadable applications that you experience as a single player, right? Can you talk a little bit about that and why that choice? Because I remember you had also an interesting perspective on it.
Yeah, and also,
Absolutely.
sorry, before just to add to that question,
Please.
I was just thinking that while the experience of the show it's individual, like all the work that you do is quite social. It involves so many people, like so many artists. It's like a huge like every show includes like more than like 15 artists, or I don't know how many. I can't remember now the numbers, but are quite high numbers. And then you also have been mentioning throughout the whole talk all these like collaborations with longtime friends and with other artists. So it's yeah, I'm also interested on listening to your answer to Marco's question, because I can see all that social part on building the show, but not on the experience of the show. So
Absolutely.
yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I can also hear a kookaburra right now, so that's very exciting. I'm in Australia, by the way, for those listening. So yeah, to answer, just to backtrack a little bit, while I was talking about the location of, you know, you asked about the location, it's really, the experiment is always to enhance the artwork as much as possible. And the idea there was the love of like galleries in real life have such a sense of place. And this sense of place is something I was sort of just dancing with all these years. And I thought, well, we should actually see what it does to the experience to make it feel much more like a real gallery, but still in the middle of the Swiss Alps. So it's still abstracted. It still doesn't feel like it's too grounded and down to earth, but it feels like a real place. And that's what I wanted to do with the newest one. But yeah, so multiplayer, yes. I remember us talking about this, and I think it's a very valid question, because a lot of digital galleries and digital experiences tend to have multiplayer. The simple answer is, again, it's interesting. I feel I'm very reverent to the fact that it's an art gallery, and I take it seriously in that respect. But it's also it's very much like the video game that I'm developing is like the perfect version of an art gallery experience for me. And for me, I don't love, I mean, I love, I love actually a empty gallery. This is the ideal space for me to be in a gallery. No one around, just me. And so I value that experience so much, and I find that to be where I can engage with the artwork the most. And so that's the experience I give to the world, is a very solitary, at your own pace, not going to be bothered by anyone. You and the artwork, that's it, your own private space. And so that's why there's no multiplayer element, or no like in-game chat. It just doesn't feel. I mean, again, it's a very personal project, so it's like it makes sense for like a business who's making, you know, immersive experiences and want to do trade shows online to have that social experience, which is so important to that experience. But my dream gallery experience is not very social. At least in the experiencing of it. Obviously, you go away and you talk about the artworks, and they enrich your life, hopefully in some way, or inspire you. Of course, talk about it all you want, but I want to make sure that if someone comes to the experience wanting that solo experience, that someone isn't going to come around and sort of annoy them or spoil the experience. And again, it's very overly cautious, because there's another great gallery called the Museum of Other Realities, I believe, which is a VR gallery, very similar to the museum, and great guys over there. Robin is a very inspiring person. And there are people in that, and that's actually a wonderful experience to be walking around the gallery. And even though their avatars are very rudimentary, there's a presence there, and it's fantastic. And so it's almost tempting to be like, well, that's actually very unintrusive and beautiful and fantastic. But again, it's a lot of work too, and I make this pretty much myself and alone, and I don't really want to deal with networking programming just for the sake of it. Plus, I would never use it, and I don't think it's really core to the experience that I want to be making. At least not now. I'm sure there's an interesting idea with online interactivity in the space. Absolutely, there are many. But it's a very zen experience to make and then to release, and the runtime experience is very peaceful, and I like to keep it that way. Maybe overly cautious, but it's that reverence is really important, I think.
Yeah, thanks a lot. No, and I think I remember, like, as I said, one of like the first time that I downloaded the Xeon was maybe a couple of years after it was released, as I was I'm also very much researching all the time different modes of understanding how we can expand the museum in digital spaces. So I think was one of the examples that we looked, and we discussed thinking about what would then also become Screenbox, for example. One of the things that I was really impressed was the scale. And I was, like, we used to, especially during the pandemic, we saw a lot of museum doing like 360-degree tours or like scans and this kind of representation of the architecture of the museum that was one created in digital spaces. But then, yeah, I remember like the first time that I entered the Zeum museum, I thought it was just gonna be one of those, and then suddenly like all of these things unfolded, the uniqueness of the artworks, but also like I really felt like you can get lost in them. It's an experience
I
that
hope so.
you really have to have as a single player, I would say.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
anyway, yeah, I think maybe we didn't mention that, but we left the link in the chat, the Xeum.art, for people to download it, and everybody should go and download and try this at home in their own time. But yeah, this was just like very nice also to see a little bit like the behind the scenes and talking to you about like what went on behind, like, or in your head. I wanted to ask you about the future, although you just released this one, so you probably don't want to talk about it.
Absolutely not. No, but honestly, I mean, I almost wanted to give the same talk I gave in Tokyo, because it's very, very acutely part of the process of making the museum, is to not take it for granted that there will be another one, that it's going to be in a yearly thing. It's very much like when the planets align and it feels the most right, and it's the most fun and the most rewarding to engage with. And there's maybe some sort of a couple interesting ideas fueling like the behind the scenes and the reasons to do it. So I again I think about all sorts of things the museum could be. It's collaboration and it's a celebration of art. So lots of ideas. I even spoke to a friend recently about like, oh, I think I have an idea for the next one. And they were like, are you kidding? That's a surprising one. This is unlike you. You don't do this. And I had to be like, yeah, you're right. We're not going to do that. Absolutely not. But just because I don't want to pre-plan it, if there's an idea that we can do that just seems feasible, again, it's a lot of time. So it's wherever it feels right to do, we do it. And if there's never another one, I'm very happy with there never being another one too. That's really where I need to get to after we release one, because it's really planets align.
I was also wondering if you have ever thought on sort of expanding the exhibitions beyond the game engine itself. So maybe going across other online platforms or even like physical spaces, sort of like, because it does feel quite like enclosed on that space and using the game engine. But I was wondering if maybe some of the artworks also have some sort of different extensions that could work in other spaces, and if that would make any sense for you, because it sort of challenges also like the whole game engine curating thinking.
Yes, I mean, I would love to open a real gallery. That would be fantastic. So I mean, we have works. I love just when interesting things happen. When I say to an artist, you can do whatever you want, and then we get something that is sort of cross media. Like there's a piece by an artist called James Crossley in this one. I can zoom over to it, which is a sort of his project, which is like basically. It's like a Google Maps project that you can place this monument here, which you'll see here, on a map that where like a protest has happened or there's social unrest. And so this is the model that is used and it's recontextualized for the space. But this is an art project that is existing out there in the world and has its own sort of philosophy and its own engine and it's going. So I love that sort of stuff. In terms of the museum, I mean, again, I have to emphasize, it's like, I really do feel like, this is maybe diminishing the curatorial role, but it really feels like I'm 99% a game developer and 1% a curator in this process, because, I mean, there's a lot of curation in directing a game and what goes into your game. So in terms of, like, so I embrace that. I embrace the cross-media experience if artists want to do that. And it's an interesting idea. But yeah, I'm making like my dream gallery experience video game, and I'm very good at that. It's a well-worked muscle, and I like that.
Were you also thinking in your head what percentage of curator are we, or was it just?
Yeah, in my fantasy it was 100%, both of you, of course. As I said to you, when a curator, it seems when you send me an email and you say you're a curator, something inside me goes, okay, I have to do whatever they say. And that's from a place of deep respect, because I think it's a lot. It's not work, but it's something that can only exist with passion to curate something on this not even scale, but of this form factor. To keep all the artists in your head and to share parts of your taste and your to me it's very personal. So and it's a lot of work. So I have a great respect for the role of curation. Yeah. Which again, I imagine you are both. That's all you do, and you've done it since you were babies. So that's what I think. Yeah.
We were born curating. Yes.
Absolutely.
I have a question about, like, how do you feel? When we talk about games and art, some of the things that also connects to this in my mind is game art and, for example, practices of hacking and modding. Like modifying games. How do you feel? Has anybody like modded a museum?
Oh no, I would love that. I mean, I love how Valve you know, at a certain point, just release the tools for their games. Not they're not the only ones that do it, but I
Yeah.
love modding, and I love that. And I had thought, I don't think I've ever spoken to Quinn about this, but there have been ideas of like, should we just put out your kit and say make a gallery? I mean, at that point, it's like, well, then I have to convince Quinn to give their assets, and it's like, well, that's really their work. But anyway, I would love that to happen. Again, it's the only barrier there is like the reference for the artists who, you know, we do the things pretty above board, and we have little contracts that like talk about the rights of the work, and so the artist knows they own the work, and they know that we're just using it for this specific thing, and sort of they see the build before it goes out. And so that's the only barrier, is like maybe the artists don't want their artwork recontextualized, and I'm very aware of that.
Yeah.
But I'd love, you know, I'm not sure if anyone really wants it, but yeah, a Xeum remix kit, you know, absolutely. But at that point, it's very simple. It's you know, if you get the right team and the right people to work with, you don't need that. You can do it yourself, and then it's totally yours, and it just feels better that way. You know, if I guess maybe that's a little bit closed-minded, but so I love it in concept. I don't really know what you're pitching, but yeah, the only consideration is my consideration for just the artist, their artwork, and that's what I like to make sure that the artists like super know what their work is going to be presented as, how it's going to be presented, and they're happy with it. And you know, like, you can't guarantee that when someone else is messing around with the assets. So love it in concept, but for something like this, it's like very personal. So sorry, go ahead.
If there's any mother watching us or watching the recording of this screen walk, you are welcome to mod it with respect.
Be
To the
kind,
artworks,
mother.
be kind, please. Don't destroy the artworks. Be respectful with the artworks, but go ahead and modificate.
Well, we don't have an SDK, so if you can do that, it's going to be a lot of work. So have fun, you know, and it's probably illegal. Maybe if they have to reverse engineer, I don't know. But
Yeah, and let us know afterwards, of course. Yes.
Yeah, let me know. Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe just one final remark that I wanted to say, you know, especially when we talk about digital spaces and digital art, I feel so strongly about what you're doing with the Xeum, because I feel that at every cycles, this part of arts and culture gets eaten up by different discourses, more tied to financial interests. You know, now we're of course hearing a lot of like AI coming from investment firms in the Silicon Valley, NFTs attached to ownership, and all of this. So I think it's very precious to have spaces like this that engage with questions of digitality and arts and culture in you know, towards like this idea of also contemplation and this idea towards an experience of artworks that is disconnected from that.
In the words of, I feel like I'm evoking David Lynch when I say, and sorry to swear, not really swearing, but yeah, NFTs are total bullshit, and I despise them. And it's not even easy to it's not even hard, sorry to say, to resist the idea of doing it, like with the gallery. It's such a turn off of an idea. But it's interesting, as we spoke about, Marco, a little bit. It's like, you know, there's no alternative for the, I guess, mass market galleries. It just seems like a good idea, and people do it, and it's very impersonal and very cold and very. It's a shame, you know. I don't know if this is revealing too much, but when I look for artists and I see a beautiful artwork, I just pray when I go to that when I go to their social media, you know, profile, that there's no NFT links, because I have to go, no, I don't know about that. I just don't, you know. And then it's, you know, artists that have been in the Xeum do NFTs, and then I'm on the other side. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Why would they do that? But, you know, I'm not the boss of anyone, and people make their own decisions. But yeah, I just find it so uninspiring in terms of what it implies and what it's trying to do with like the gallery space, and how, as you were talking about a little bit, real galleries seem tempted to sort of go there because, you know, they see money and it seems like a great idea, you know. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just not that interesting. I think if it was really interesting, I'd feel different about it. But the technology is interesting. Unfortunately, the way it's being applied is very uninteresting. But yeah, I'm sorry if there was a question there. I just wanted to say something rude about NFTs. But I mean, to each their own, by all means.
And I think on that note, it's a beautiful moment to maybe wrap up.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for your presentation, for sharing with us all the work that you've done, all the curatorial work that you've done throughout the
Oh, thank you.
years.
Yeah, thank you.
On the museum. Sorry,
Mhm.
it's really interesting work, and it's also again to everyone watching us is available for free to download and to experience it on your own whenever like you want. So it's
Please
I
do.
invite everyone to do that.
And with the power given to us by our institutions, we knight you officially as a curator.
Oh, what an honor! Fantastic.
No
What
need to be knight. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm knighted by the government of Switzerland, as you
Sure.
Yeah,
And-
thank you all for watching.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, we will be back in 2 weeks. So anyone who's watching us, please come back in 2 weeks.
Right, so in 2 weeks, we're back with more digital spaces, but this time we're going to look at the ruins of digital spaces with Hortense Boulet-Ifren. So join us for these special archaeological tours of virtual ruins.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Thank you.